So to recap for the Zoom that is now recording, this is another little addition to your Flexbox that you can add to adjust the spacing dependent on your the amount of parents and children within your example. So if we go into the example file that we've got presently, you should be able to see if you're joining the optional Zoom room here. We have that same relationship that we had earlier of 70% and 30%, 70 on section one, or maybe it's 60-40, but like the ratio of adding up to 100, it is 60-40. But let's say you don't necessarily want these div boxes to be touching. If we imagine there's no border and that these pieces are just interacting with one another like this, so you can just kind of imagine their sections. If you wanted to add a little bit of space in between those sections, there's another CSS property that you add called justify content. And we're going to add it to the container so that it waterfalls over all of the children nested within the container. So if we go to our agenda for today and then go to the CSS Flex Playground, there is a, once it loads, it's thinking about it. There's a section on the left here, remember, is for the container. The section on the right is for all the children or the items within it. There's a justify content one right here. It's a property of the Flex containers. I'm going to put the captions right away. Okay, so Flex start by default is the one that's the same as position static, so it's not going to do anything crazy, but it's going to start at the Flex box. Flex end is the same. It's going to move the ratio is going to maintain the same dependent on these children, 1 through 5. It's just whether you want it to begin at the start of the container or the end of the container. But it's these three, and there's a fourth one as well that I want to talk about the most. So space between is going to take a first look at the size of the container and evenly space out or put the same amount of space, excuse me, there's a difference, the same amount of space between each of these children or these Flex items inside of this Flex container. Center just puts them all connected in the center, just like Flex start or Flex end. Center just puts them all in the middle there, and it will stay in the center depending on the size of your viewport. But then there's space around. So space around is a little different from space between because it's got a little bit of space around the outside, kind of like a little bit of padding, and it's still maintaining a pretty even amount of space in between here. So what you would do to actually apply this to your CSS is you would go into your Flex container, right? Here's our Flex container housing our entire box, or our entire children, I mean. So I'm going to add a border to that real quick. I'm going the long way because it's like muscle memory at this point. Okay, 1 pixel solid black. Refresh. There's our Flex container. You can see it's overlapping just a tiny bit, but that's because I have a weird monitor. So what I do now is I would go back into my CSS for my Flex container and set the justify dash contents. This is kind of like text alignment. And I'm going to set it to space around. Space around is the first place you could stop. Space around is a good first place to stop. I'm going to turn these borders back on so you can see the interactions. I'm actually going to turn the border off on the container. Control question mark. Okay, refresh. So where'd my output go? There we go. Refresh that. It should have, if it behaved the way I needed it to, it should have added a little bit of space around each of these justified contents. So let's try space between. Control S, refresh. Come on, why is mine not working? Just kidding. Let me do some adjustments real quick. Mine's misbehaving. So we should just have one container.
What did I do wrong?
That's
Yes. Okay. So the problem I had with space between is that my children were set up to take up 100% of the available space. So my computer doesn't know how to do the math on how to get that available space between the two. So now that I've set these to each be 30% of the available space, right? We only have our two children, flex text and flex images. Now when I go and I add some space between, there's going to be an even amount of space between them. This would be 40% of our available space here, because this is taking up 30% of the viewport. This is taking up 30% of the viewport. That leaves 40% remaining, 60 plus 40, right? If I resize this, it will maintain that 40% while also keeping the, excuse me, while also keeping the relationships, the width relationship on the children the same. So again, if you're curious, it's justify content in the CSS playground, and I set mine by default, or the one that I like to start with is space between. So that's going to add just a little bit of breathing room, whatever is left, whatever remainder from your children's competition for the 100% space. 30 plus 30 is 60, so that leaves 40 to space between. So if we did something like 40 and 40 to make 80, not 340, that'd be crazy. 40 and 40 to make 80, it should have only 20% remaining in between my two flex children. So you just want a little bit of breathing room, you want a little bit of proximity difference between your excuse me, between your flex children, that is the quick way to do it.